What if your entire life could be summarized by one single word? Not your success, not your reputation, not even your mistakes, but faith. Faith, the invisible thread that connects man to God, the unseen bridge between heaven's promises and earth's realities. Thousands of years ago, ordinary men and women walked this earth. They had no titles, no platforms, no guarantees, yet their names were whispered in heaven and written forever in a chapter unlike any other. Hebrews, chapter 11, a chapter that does not tell of kings or conquests, but of believers who dared to trust when everything around them screamed impossible. A chapter that heaven itself seems to stand at attention when it's read. But why? Why does Hebrews 11 stand apart from every other chapter in the Bible? Why did God choose to immortalize this list of names? This hall of faith, carved into eternity itself, from Abel, who offered his best when no one was watching, to Abraham, who walked into the unknown, to Moses, who chose the reproach of Christ over the treasures of Egypt. Each name is a story. Each story is a test, and each test, a revelation of what moves the heart of God. But what if I told you that Hebrews 11 is more than a list of ancient heroes? That hidden in this chapter is a divine pattern, a map of faith that can unlock your destiny, transform your prayer life, and teach you how to stand firm when heaven seems silent? Because faith, true faith, doesn't begin when you see the promise. It begins when all you have left is the word. So stay with me until the end, because before the story is over, you'll see why Hebrews 11 isn't just a record of the past. It's the blueprint for every believer who's ever asked God, "Why me?" For every heart that's prayed in the dark, and for every soul still waiting for the promise to come. This is the faith that shook heaven. Picture this. You're standing before a corridor that seems to stretch into eternity. The air is still thick with reverence. Torches line the marble walls, their flames dancing like whispers from another time. As you take your first step forward, your eyes adjust to the light, and then you see them. Names, dozens of them, each one engraved in stone glowing faintly, as if heaven itself keeps them alive. Abel, the first name that catches your eye. A man whose worship cost him his life, but whose faith still speaks today. Enoch, a man who never tasted death, who walked with God so closely that one day he simply vanished into glory. Noah, a builder of madness, mocked by the world, but chosen by God to preserve it. And as you walk farther down the corridor, you see more names, familiar yet mysterious. Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, each name a story, each story a miracle, each miracle born from faith. You pause for a moment and realize something profound. These weren't superhumans. They weren't flawless saints carved from divine stone. They were people, ordinary, uncertain, fragile, just like you. Abraham once doubted. Sarah once laughed at God's promise. Moses once ran from his calling. Yet heaven didn't record their failures. It remembered their faith. And that's when it hits you. This corridor isn't a museum of perfection. It's a monument to belief. Because faith doesn't deny fear, it defies it. Faith doesn't erase weakness, it redeems it. And then, you notice something else. Beneath each name, carved faintly in smaller letters, are words like waited, endured, trusted. The language of faith is not comfort, it's endurance. You look around and whisper to yourself, how could they believe so deeply when they had so little? And in that moment, a thought presses on your heart. A quiet answer, almost like a voice from above. They didn't see the promise, but they knew the promiser. Because faith, real faith, isn't built on what you can touch or explain. It's built on trust in the unseen hand of God. In a world filled with doubt, fear, and broken promises, Hebrews 11 whispers one truth that still echoes across the ages. Faith still works, even when prayers seem unanswered, even when miracles feel delayed, even when the night grows longer than expected. Faith still works. The book of Hebrews was not written from comfort, but from crisis. It was a letter not to the strong, but to the weary, not to those dancing in victory, but to those barely standing in faith. It was written to believers who were running out of strength. The early church, men and women who had once seen miracles, who had once walked in boldness and fire, were now hiding in caves, meeting in secret, whispering prayers under the threat of death. They had lost their homes, their families, their safety. Everything that made life stable had been taken from them. And in that silence, in the stillness after the persecution, after the betrayals, after the nights of unanswered prayer, their hearts began to whisper a question few dared to say out loud: has God forgotten us? It's a question as old as humanity itself, a question you might have asked in your own quiet moments, when you prayed and the sickness didn't leave, when you believed but the door stayed closed, when you trusted yet still felt alone. Maybe right now, your faith feels smaller than it used to. Maybe you've tried to keep believing, but it's been years since you felt anything. You smile in church, you quote the verses, but deep inside you wonder if faith still works. That's why this letter was written, not to teach theology, but to reignite courage, because faith doesn't live in noise. It's proven in silence. Faith doesn't thrive in comfort. It's forged in fire. And so, the writer of Hebrews takes his readers, and us, on a journey back through time. He reminds them of every man and woman who ever dared to believe the invisible. And he says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. What a contradiction those words must have sounded like to people who'd lost everything. Substance of things hoped for, evidence of things unseen. It almost sounds impossible to find proof in what cannot be touched, to stand firm when you see nothing at all. But that is the essence of faith, because every hero listed in Hebrews 11 once stood in that same silence. Abel never saw his sacrifice avenged. Noah spent decades building an ark without a single drop of rain. Abraham waited a lifetime for one promise to come true. Sarah laughed before she believed. Moses wandered 40 years through a wilderness, dying before he saw the land he longed for. Every single one of them faced the same haunting question we all do: God, are you still there? Yet their silence was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of their faith, because faith is not the absence of fear. Faith is the decision to trust God, even when the evidence tells you not to. And so, to those weary believers, and to you, Hebrews 11 is God's way of saying, you are not alone in your waiting. Every hero of faith walked through the same darkness before the breakthrough. As the writer of Hebrews leads us deeper into this sacred chapter, the names carved upon the walls of faith begin to glow, and the stories we've only read begin to breathe. These are not legends. They were people, fragile, flawed, afraid, but they believed. Abel, the first name written in the hall of faith, he gave his best, not when the crowd was cheering, but when no one was watching. He poured his heart into an altar unseen, believing that God saw what man ignored. By faith, Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice. Hebrews 11 verse 4. And though the world silenced him, his faith still speaks today. Then, Noah, the man who built an ark when there was no rain. The sun burned hot above him. The sky mocked him with its endless blue. And yet, each day, plank after plank, nail after nail, he built what no one understood. For 120 years, he preached a message no one believed. He endured laughter, insults, and loneliness. But the word says, by faith Noah, being warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household. Hebrews 11 verse 7. He was not building for applause. He was building for salvation. Abraham, the friend of God, he walked toward a land he could not see. No map, no certainty, only a promise. Every step he took was an act of defiance against doubt. When God said, leave everything you know, he didn't ask for details, he simply obeyed. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place which he would receive as an inheritance, and he went out, not knowing where he was going. Hebrews 11 verse 8. He pitched his tents in foreign soil. a stranger chasing the invisible. And when the years stretched long, and the promise of a son seemed impossible, still he believed. Sarah, she laughed at the promise, laughed because hope had grown old. But even her laughter became a seed of faith, because behind that laugh was a woman who wanted to believe again. And when she finally did, her womb opened, and the impossible became real. By faith, Sarah herself received strength to conceive, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Hebrews 11 verse 11. Sometimes faith doesn't start with boldness. It starts with broken laughter. It starts with a whisper. Maybe, just maybe, God can still do it. And then, Moses, the prince who walked away from the palace. He turned his back on luxury, choosing the reproach of Christ over the treasures of Egypt. He could have had gold, but he chose God. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. Hebrews 11 verses 24 to 25. He chose the wilderness over comfort, chains over crowns, purpose over pleasure, because he saw something Pharaoh could never see, a kingdom that would never end. Each of these names, Abel, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Moses, they stand as pillars in the corridor of faith. But their stories were not about perfection. They were about perseverance. They doubted, they waited, they wept, and yet they believed. Faith doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like building when no one understands, like walking when you can't see the road, like laughing through tears, like choosing obedience when compromise feels easier. These stories aren't ancient history. They're reflections of our own journey. So let me ask you, which of these stories reminds you of your own season of waiting? Is it Abel, giving your best when no one notices? Noah, building in silence while others mock you? Abraham, walking into the unknown? Sarah, learning to believe again? Or Moses, surrendering comfort for calling? Because the truth is, the God who was faithful to them is still writing stories of faith today. And yours may be next. But what about when the promise doesn't come true? When the prayers seem to vanish into silence, and heaven feels like it's closed its doors? We love the stories where faith triumphs, where seas part, wombs open, and walls fall down. But Hebrews 11 doesn't end there. It takes a darker turn, a sacred, painful turn, that many of us try not to look at. The writer begins to speak of others, those whose names were never recorded, those who didn't see deliverance, those who believed and still died believing. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, that they might gain a better resurrection. Others suffered mocking and scourging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. Hebrews 11 verses 35 to 37. These were not the stories of victory, but the stories of endurance, the kind of faith that holds on in the dark. When the miracles don't come, they lost everything: home, safety, family, even life itself. Yet Scripture says, the world was not worthy of them. Hebrews 11 verse 38. These are the unseen heroes, the nameless saints who walked through fire and never turned back. They believed in something beyond sight, a better country, heavenly one. They understood something most of us forget. That faith was never about results. It was about trust. Trust in a God whose goodness is not measured by outcomes, but by his unchanging nature. You see, real faith isn't proven when everything works out. It's proven when nothing does, and you still lift your hands, when you still whisper, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Maybe you know what that feels like. You prayed for healing, and it didn't come. You obeyed, and the door still closed. You gave, and the blessing never arrived. You stood in faith, but the outcome broke you. If that's you, you're not forgotten. You stand shoulder to shoulder with the same saints of Hebrews 11, those who walked through disappointment and still said, God, I trust you. Because sometimes faith doesn't make sense until eternity. Sometimes the invisible hand of God is still working behind the silence, writing a story the world can't yet see. So if you've ever obeyed God and still suffered loss, if you've walked through the valley with no explanation and yet refused to stop believing, you are not weak. You are a witness, a part of that same unbroken line of those who lived and died in faith. If you've ever obeyed and still suffered, if you've trusted and still wept, type it in the comments. I still believe. Because that's the faith heaven honors. Not the faith that gets every answer, but the faith that never lets go of the giver. For centuries, people have tried to define faith. Some have turned it into a formula, a way to get what they want from God. If I just declare it, I'll have it. If I believe hard enough, nothing bad will happen. But Hebrews 11 shatters that illusion, because true faith was never about control. It was never about manipulating outcomes or forcing miracles. It was never about naming and claiming. It was about trusting and waiting. Faith is not a transaction. It's a relationship. It's the quiet courage to say, God, even if I never see it, I'll still follow you. That's the kind of faith that shakes heaven. That's the kind of faith that moves the heart of God. By faith, Abel offered. By faith, Noah built. By faith, Abraham obeyed. By faith, Moses forsook Egypt. By faith, each line echoes like footsteps. Footsteps through history. Footsteps through darkness. Footsteps that lead straight to the throne of God. The Bible doesn't say that without miracles, it's impossible to please God. It doesn't say without comfort, without wealth, without answers. It says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Hebrews 11 verse 6. Because faith is heaven's language. It's the unseen voice that says, I still believe, even when I can't see. It's the melody that only eternity understands. And when a believer speaks that language, when your trembling heart whispers, I trust you, Lord. Even through tears, heaven hears it. Angels pause. God takes notice. Faith doesn't make life easier. It makes it possible. It gives you the strength to rise one more time, to pray one more prayer, to love one more day, even when everything in you wants to give up. That's what the saints of Hebrews 11 discovered. That's what every believer must learn. Faith is not sight. Faith is not proof. Faith is a bridge between what is promised and what is yet to come. And when you walk across that bridge, when you trust God without evidence, you touch eternity. You align your heart with heaven itself. Because faith is not a word we speak. It's a world we step into. A world where impossibilities bow, where silence becomes a song, and where every step forward is an offering that says, Lord, I believe. Maybe this is what God wanted all along. Not a generation that demands proof, but people who believe anyway. A people who walk with Him in the unseen. Because faith is the one thing that connects earth to heaven. Right now, wherever you are, if you're choosing to trust God again, if you're choosing to believe even when it doesn't make sense, type in the comments, faith is my language. Because when you speak that language, you move the heart of God. So what does Hebrews 11 mean for you right now, in this very moment? Because this chapter isn't just ancient history. It's a mirror reflecting the faith that still lives in you. It's not just about the giants who came before. It's about the unseen saints still walking by faith today. In homes, in hospitals, in quiet rooms where no one is watching. Faith isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as small as showing up in prayer. Even when heaven seems silent, faith means getting up to worship. After a week that broke your heart, it means forgiving, even when the pain still stings. It means giving when you barely have enough for yourself. It means trusting God when the outcome makes no sense at all. You see, you may never build an ark like Noah, but your obedience could save your family. You may never lead a nation like Moses, but your quiet stand for righteousness might set generations free. You may never face a fiery furnace, but your choice to trust God in the heat of life's trials will still testify to heaven that faith is alive. And maybe right now, you're standing in your own Hebrews 11 moment, a chapter that hasn't been written yet, a story that feels unfinished, uncertain, covered in the ink of tears. But remember this, the same God who wrote their stories is still writing yours. He sees every prayer you whisper in the dark. He hears every sigh that never makes it into words. And when you choose to believe anyway, when you choose faith over fear, He records it in heaven's book as another act of faith. Because faith is not about what you see. It's about who you trust. And every time you trust God in the unknown, you echo the same spirit that moved through Abel, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, and Moses. This is what Hebrews 11 teaches us today. Faith is not an ancient relic. It's a living fire passed down through generations, now burning in you. So wherever you are right now, in the waiting, in the silence, in the uncertainty, don't stop believing. Your faith is still speaking, just like theirs did. By faith they obtained a good report. Hebrews 11 verse 2. And one day, your faith will be counted among theirs. If this message speaks to your heart, if you're choosing to trust God again, type it in the comments. Faith over fear. Because that declaration, even typed through trembling hands, is how heaven knows your story isn't over yet. If Hebrews 11 were being written today, whose name would be added? Because the hall of faith didn't end with Moses. It didn't stop with Abraham or Sarah. That chapter is still being written, line by line, life by life, faith by faith. It would speak of people like you, people who may never hold a staff like Moses, but who carry a cross of their own every single day. It would say, by faith, a single mother bowed her head over an empty kitchen table and prayed for her children while bills piled high, and God provided. By faith, a man forgave the one who betrayed him, choosing peace over revenge, and heaven called it victory. By faith, a young woman refused to compromise her purity, even when the world mocked her, and God called her brave. By faith, a father prayed for a prodigal child, long after everyone else gave up, and the angels wrote it down. By faith, a widow stood at a graveside and whispered, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be His name." You see, Hebrews 11 isn't just about them. It's about us. It's about every believer who still dares to trust when everything says it's over. The hall of faith didn't close in the first century. It continues every time someone believes in the dark. Every time someone loves when it's easier to hate. Every time someone gives when they could have held back. Every time someone keeps walking when the road disappears. Faith isn't just an ancient story. It's a living legacy. And you, yes you, are writing your own verse in it. Maybe no one will ever see your tears. Maybe no book will record your obedience. But heaven sees it. Heaven writes it down. You are a continuation of the same faith that built the ark, that crossed the Red Sea, that conquered kingdoms and endured the sword. The same faith that looked up to heaven and said, "God, I still trust you." And one day, when all of time is complete, and God gathers His people from every age, the list will be read again. And maybe, just maybe, your name will echo through eternity. Think of someone whose faith has inspired you. Someone who kept believing, kept loving, kept hoping. Tag them in the comments. Let them know their faith still speaks. Because Hebrews 11 is not finished. It's still being written through us. It began with a man named Abel, the very first worshiper recorded in the Bible. He brought his best, not leftovers, not convenience, but his best. And because of that, he found favor with God. But do you remember what the scripture said? Though he is dead, he still speaks. Hebrews 11 verse 4. Even death couldn't silence Abel's faith, because faith never dies. Faith leaves echoes, echoes that never fade, never weaken, never stop reverberating through time. Every time you choose obedience over comfort, forgiveness over revenge, trust over fear, you leave an echo, and heaven hears it. From the blood of Abel that cried out from the ground, to the song of martyrs that still rises from forgotten graves. Faith has a voice. It speaks louder than fear. It speaks stronger than death. It speaks longer than time itself. Your faith, yes, yours, is part of that same eternal chorus. When you worship in the middle of your pain, when you keep praying after hearing no, when you love when it doesn't make sense, you're not just living by faith, You're adding another verse to the melody of heaven, because faith doesn't end in Hebrews 11. It continues through you. Through every believer who still dares to believe that unseen hands are working all things together for good. Every act of obedience today, every tear of surrender, every yes whispered through trembling lips becomes a seed of eternity. And those seeds, they don't die. They bloom in unseen soil. In moments you'll only understand on the other side of glory. Faith is not a sound that fades. It's an echo that grows louder in eternity. And when your story is told, when the book of your life is read in heaven's light, it will be said of you, though they are gone, their faith still speaks. If your heart still believes, even in silence, even in struggle, write in the comments, my faith still speaks. Because every word of faith today becomes the echo of eternity. When the final verse of Hebrews 11 fades into chapter 12, we realize something profound. It was never written to impress us. It was written to invite us. Because this chapter, this hall of faith, is not a museum of perfect people. It's a living testimony of fragile, flawed men and women who dared to believe God, even when nothing made sense. One, it defines faith. Faith is not wishful thinking. It's not pretending everything's fine. Faith is seeing through heaven's eyes. It's the quiet confidence that God is still who He said He is, even when your world says otherwise. It's trusting the substance behind your hope and walking toward a promise that has no visible road. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. 2, it honors endurance. Hebrews 11 doesn't celebrate quick miracles. It honors long obedience. It remembers Noah, who waited a century before rain fell. Abraham, who walked through decades of unanswered promises. Sarah, who wrestled with laughter before holding her miracle. Moses, who gave up comfort for calling. They endured. They believed. And in the silence between the promise and the fulfillment, they discovered who God truly is. 3, it connects earth to heaven. Hebrews 11 isn't just about the past. It's a bridge between what God once did and what He's still doing. Every story in that chapter is a thread, weaving heaven's faithfulness into humanity's weakness. And now, that same thread runs through you. When you stand firm in the dark, when you pray though tears fall, when you choose holiness over comfort, you are writing your own verse in the same eternal story. Hebrews 11 matters because it proves that God still delights in faith, that heaven still moves when a believer says, I trust you. That your unseen obedience, your quiet worship, your uncelebrated faithfulness still pleases the heart of the Father. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Hebrews 11 verse 6. But with faith, you become the kind of person heaven remembers. So the question is no longer, what made Hebrews 11 so great? The question is, what chapter will your life write? If God were to record your faith today, will it be the story of one who waited, one who trusted through pain, one who built, prayed, believed when no one else could see? Because the same God who wrote their names is still writing today. If this message stirred something inside you, comment below. Lord, let my life be a testimony of faith. Because when heaven writes your story, your faith won't just survive, it will still speak. If this message has stirred something in your spirit, if somewhere deep within, you've remembered what it means to believe again, don't keep it to yourself. Because the story of faith is not meant to stay in ancient pages. It's meant to live in hearts like yours. Maybe your faith feels weak. Maybe life has tested you beyond what you imagined. But the God who strengthened Abraham, who stood beside Daniel, who walked with Moses through the wilderness, is still faithful today. And if you're watching this, it's not by accident. God is reminding you, you're not forgotten. Your story isn't over. If this message strengthened your faith, comment below, I'm walking by faith. Because every time you declare those words, you're adding your name to the story heaven is still writing. And before you scroll away, share this video with someone who's standing on the edge of giving up. Someone who needs to be reminded that God still moves when His people believe. Because the story of faith didn't end in Hebrews 11. It continues, through you, the just shall live by faith. Hebrews 10 verse 38.